Always a pleasure to be with you. If I may paraphrase, wherefore seeing we also are compassed about with so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and let us work with patience to find every one of those witnesses as they relate to our family tree. Now, of course, part of that was from the Bible. Most of you will remember hearing that. One day at our club, a lady came up to me and handed me one of the books she'd prepared, loose leaf, and she says, "I want you to look at my family tree." And I said, "Wonderful." I relished the thought of looking through this, and it was all, she had about 5,000 names, births, marriage dates, and deaths. That was it. That's all there was to it. 3,000 or 5,000 of these things scattered through this book. And in my way of thinking, that does not a family history make. And so I have always preached that you take and find as many documents as you can. And if you're going to tonight carry away maybe 2 or 3 things that I mentioned, that's fine. But one of them I do want you to carry away is go back and look at the documents you already have and look on those documents for the witnesses. You can no longer cross-examine your ancestors, but you can find out a little something about those witnesses. Instead of focusing on the last name of your ancestor, focus on the last name of the witness. There was a reason why that person was a witness at that particular time. What are some of these documents? Well, I'll make a list, and you can copy some of them down if you want. We begin always with the birth or baptismal record. I got too many S's in there. This holds true in this country or overseas. It's especially rich in Europe because it was compassed round with a lot of history, and they went into great detail with a birth or a baptism, not either civil or clerical, church, or both, if you can possibly get hold of it. Where were you baptized? If you were baptized, where were you baptized? All right, now it's a good place to start. What? I'll bet you that who held you during the baptism? Do you remember? Obviously you don't. Have you looked it up? Have you ever asked anybody who held me when I was baptized? Why was that person selected to hold me? Who was that person in the life of our family? Here's a witness, and this witness can testify to what happened on that particular occasion and the relationship to your family. No other event was more important in your family tree that day than your baptism. And the same holds true to your parents, your grandparents, and your great-grandparents. I find it astounding that some people who call themselves genealogists make no effort to find copies of these documents, the original copies. And they are available, for the most part, going back. I've got some going back to 1564. And they can be found. And in this, or at least prove to yourself that they don't exist. But this was an important event. Now, you don't know it, but I'm going to tell you right now. My eldest daughter is here tonight. And she is right over there. I had 4 daughters, and that's my daughter Karen, and she's attending tonight. Now, nothing was more important than her baptism. Now, she probably doesn't know who held it or where it was. Maybe you might know where it was. We'll go into that some other time. If I can pique her interest, I know I can pique yours because you're dedicated genealogists. Now, on that document are not only the person who held you, but the other witnesses. Most churches insisted on 3 subscribers to it. Who were these people? Well, concentrate on finding out who they were and why they were involved with your family. Another set of documents, you probably have a bunch of them laying around the house from your research, marriage documents. Now, this usually required 2 witnesses to the marriage. They take, after the marriage, even if it was in the church, they go over to the minister's office and they sign the document. Who were the 2 that signed the document? Who were they? Well, one of them was probably the best man, the other could have been the matron of honor. But that's not always the case. So go back and look at those documents and say, I've got to identify those people and why they were there that day. Another, usually it was, who was the maid of honor?
Sister.
Who, huh?
A sister.
Well, most likely a sister. And somebody probably traveled miles and miles to attend that wedding. Who were those folks? And where were they coming from? And why were they there? Land conveyances. A lot of folks will look up, they won't look up the conveyance itself. If you do a lot of genealogy where you get the tapes and put them up on the screen, a lot of people take the shortcut. They get the indices, they get the index, and they look on the index and take that as gospel and never get the document that the index refers to, because they don't want to spend the extra $375 to get that film, I guess. I don't know why. But once you've used the index, and by the way, the index is both ways, grantor, grantee, so be sure to look at both, because the clerk often makes a mistake and misspells the name or something. So be sure to get the reference from both the grantor and the grantee side of the index. Then get that document, order that film, and get the document. There are witnesses on that document. If your ancestor conveyed away a piece of property, who else is on that? Who else's signature is on that besides his? His wife. His wife had to sign it. If you're unsure about her name, or you're not sure whether he was married at that time, or to whom, if he conveyed a piece of property, you get that conveyance and look at it, and you've got her name. All right? Also on there are 2 subscribing witnesses to the transaction. Who were they? Neighbors. They had to travel to the courthouse that day to do a favor to your grandpa. And they must have been a good buddy, or they wouldn't take a day out from plowing to go down to the courthouse with your grandpa. You're beginning to build a picture of his relationships and who he was dealing with just from a land conveyance. Usually the other subscribing witness was the fellow who prepared the document, the lawyer or something like that. There are chattel conveyances. You know what a chattel is? These are usually found in the documents. Again, there are grantor, grantee, 2 indices. And this had to do with cattle, had to do with hay, oats, whatever, all right? And again, it's just, in this case, the wife did not have to join, but there had to be 2 witnesses. Now, this holds true in this country, and it holds true in Germany and Sweden and all over the place. Probably in Portugal, I don't know. I've not done any down there, but maybe you could tell me that in Portugal and Italy and Sicily they had to do that too. I don't know. But that is, find those witnesses and who they were. I'm going to show you some on the screen, pending the amount of time we have available to us. where I found, well, we'll wait till we get there. Naturalization papers. In this country, when you had to go down to a courthouse to get your naturalization, you had to file an intent, and then you had to file your final papers. And the final papers, you had to have somebody along as a subscribing witness. Now, if you were on the frontier, or you were in Wisconsin in the 1860s, to go to the courthouse, you had to literally set apart a day to get to the courthouse, usually some distance away, and your subscribing witness had to be somebody who was willing to give up a work day to travel with you down there. And you're going to find that name in the naturalization papers and concentrate, run that name. Who was he? Did he serve with your grandpa in a Civil War unit? Was he on an adjoining farm? Was he a brother-in-law? You can amplify the relationship by looking up the witnesses. Look them up in the census or wherever. Estate papers. If you've not found estate papers, be sure to do it. I've been down in the basement of many a courthouse going through finding those little wrapped papers and rejoicing when I found them, because there are all sorts of subscribing witnesses, affidavits. If some of the potential heirs lived out of that jurisdiction, they had to make affidavits. It's a gold mine, but there are witnesses after witnesses. There's some on almost every piece of paper in the estate paper. Pension files. How many here have gotten the pension files from Washington on one of your ancestors that served in the service? Well, there are a handful of, a lot of you know. Isn't that a marvelous resource? Page after page after page of affidavits, relationships. You can build almost an entire family tree from that. But there were other pensions besides military pensions. If one of your ancestors worked on the railroads were very diligent in maintaining central files on those people who worked for them, and also the pension papers. It had to be proven, and again, witnesses. Yes, I knew so-and-so for 20 years. We worked alongside each other in the engine house, and I can verify that he put in his time with the Chicago Northwestern and is entitled to his pension. I draw 2 pensions from acting unions, Actors Equity and Screen Actors Guild. And I don't know, when I'm gone, Karen, if you want to get the copy of those papers from those unions,
Okay.
it'll give you a list of the qualifying performances that I had done over the years in order to be able to get a pension from these people. Church denominations. As we were coming over here, I asked Paul, I says, I got a question for you. If a missionary was in Japan during the 1880s, how did he get into the census? Well, we never solved that. Well, we're going to solve it, huh? Right? Okay, but
figure it out.
The church sent him to Japan. Well, I'm going to have to turn to the church, the denomination archives, to find out if he got a pension from them. Fraternal lodges and veterans organizations. I won't write that one down. Too many words. But after the Civil War, there were a number of fraternal organizations. It was very popular to belong to a lodge or to a post-military organization after the Civil War. And for that particular period especially, it's rich in lodge minutes and papers and so on. Ship manifests. You say, there are no witnesses on a ship manifest. Oh, yes there are. These folks would get on a ship and they'd ride for, this one's better, thank you. And they'd ride across that ocean for anywhere from 2 to 4 weeks, and they had nothing to do but schmooze. And they'd talk to each other. They'd say, where are you going? He said, I'm going to Pewaukee, Wisconsin. Pewaukee, where is that? He said, oh, they got a beautiful stream running through the town. It's gorgeous. My cousin wrote to me. And you can buy land there for $2 an acre. Wow. Honey, why don't we go to Pewaukee? We'll join the Schmidts and we'll go to... Great. Down in the hold, John Jones and Mabel Smith are smooching. And when they get off the ship, why, they decide to get married. You use that ship manifest and you can find out all sorts of relationships if you follow through. I know the habit is to just shoot the page with your ancestor on it. Don't do it. While you're there, while you've got it in your hands or up on the screen, shoot the whole bloomin' manifest. Really, I'm not kidding you. 8 pages, forget it. I'll lend you the money. All right? Get that in your hands. And keep it and review it from time to time, because other names on that ship will have come up in other documents or relationships. And they met on that ship. They are witnesses to each other. Newspapers. Newspaper reporter is a witness. He says, I went over to Aunt Sally's house and interviewed her last Saturday, and she told me all about her childhood when she heard Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, or whatever. All right? He's a witness, and he tells the story. And the newspapers are full of personal history information, not just births, deaths, and all that, but reporters doing interviews of people in your family. And you're going to find some wonderful stuff there. The census. You say, who's a witness in the census? Huh? Think back to your childhood. Who saw you leave the house and go to school every day, besides your own family? The neighbor there, the neighbor there, and the neighbor over there, and the neighbor over there. Witnesses to your life. And there, in the census, are witnesses to your ancestors' lives, too. Get a map, if you're dealing in a city. Have a street map ahead of you and look at the street address. Because the census taker was going, he went down one side and around the corner back. You can remap the neighborhood that your ancestor lived, the street and the houses across the street and alongside. Check on them. Did anybody here marry the guy or the girl next door? Used to happen all the time. So when you get that census from East Outhouse, Nebraska, don't just take that page. Take the pages around it and keep them and review them from time to time, and all of a sudden you say, my heaven, the Oldenburgs lived in the same neighborhood. I never realized that until just now. And they're the people I'm working on. And they were right around the corner from Grandpa and Grandma. All right. All of a sudden, your one dimension has become three-dimensional. Well, there are more. I just don't have the... If the government wants to make a security clearance on you, what do they do, among other things, besides to check the records on your background and the felony records and all that sort of thing? They make a neighborhood check. they come and they talk to the guy across the street and the guy next door. If the government thinks it's important, it ought to be important to you as a genealogist, right? All right. So, there are more. We can't, but if I can get the mind in that direction, you're going to find other things as you go along. All right. Now I'd like to give you a few illustrations of this using just one of my families. Shouldn't put this too far out of the way, but I've got a number of first names up here. And this is the order in which they were born. These were the Lehmanns. The Lehmanns came over in 1874 from Holstein. Their daddy they were all born in the old country and came over to this country. One stayed behind to finish his education. Our family memory got that screwed up. They thought it was one guy, and I finally, by going to the records, found out that it was another guy. It was another brother that stayed and finished his education. All right. The records that the family had said that so-and-so was about such and such an age. Therefore, he was born maybe around such and such a time. And you say, boy, I wish I could find the original records and find out specifically when that dude was born. Well, I won't go into how it was found, but it was found. And I found the original records. Now, the reason we're talking is not necessarily to pin down the dates. But here, Heinrich is Henry, right? Otto is Otto. Edward with a U is Edward. The next one, Dorothea, is Doris, and so on. All right. What I want to point out to you is that they were baptized at home, and the witnesses were, again, the first child gets the cream of the crop. The witnesses at that first baptism are the cream of your family. Really. Fly them in from Tokyo or wherever. Because this is the most precious child that God ever created, and we may never have another one. So that one gets all the attention. You open one of the books in our house, and 80% of the pictures are of Karen as a baby. The other three girls, you say, which one is that? How did we make a mistake and take a picture of her? George Ernst Heinrich Busse of Ransefeld. This is the clergyman who had raised the father when his own dad died. He was 9. When he was 9, his father, who was an organist in the church, died. And this Busse, a preacher, raised the boy. Important man in his life. He was the first one on the list. He was there, the clergyman who raised him. Jakob, Friedrich, Marcus, Stender, and Kiel. That was his maternal grandfather. And all of this, of course, they had to develop afterwards. Mrs. Cantorin, the choir director's wife, Charlotte Wiemann of Bergman, that was his paternal grandmother. Now, this is heavy firepower. Right? Okay. Then you could go all the way down, and as you go down the list, they become less important. Here's pastor, the wife of the pastor, and so on and so forth. But all are important, and I can tell you stories about all. I have indicated in brackets behind each one what relationship they had. Let's go down to the last girl. Do you have anybody in your family you can't pin down how old they were? There's usually one gal, and in one record she's such and such an age, and you go 5 years later, in the next record she's gotten 2 years older, and you go 10 years more, she's gotten another 3 years older, and you say, I wish I knew how old she really was. Well, Caroline is probably spinning in her grave because I found out when she was born. She was born in 1845. That's about 15 years younger than when she died. I mean, older than when she died. I'll show you a picture of her later, and you'll know her when you see her. What I'm going to point out here is even now, 9 children, all of their children that they had grew to maturity. Down here, Carl Friedrich Stender. Now, he was related to the mother's side. Machine master of Venice, Italy. The mother's youngest brother, born about 1810, he came over later. Notice that the baptism didn't take place until 9 weeks after the birth. I can only imagine that they waited until he could come all the way up from Venice to participate in that special baptism. That opens a whole new series of doors. He came over and lived in Chicago, was there during the Great Fire. I got a bunch of nails that he gave to my mother. It melted together in the Chicago fire. But that's an important thing. What was he doing in Venice? What was a German boy doing in Venice at that time? Anybody got any ideas?
Glass machines.
No. This is way back. This is.
He was running some machines.
No, he was working for the Austrians. The Austrians were occupying an occupation there, and he was working for the military as a civilian employee. Okay. All right. Here's Julius. He'll be the first one I'll bring up. Mention a couple of things about it. Where did I lay my glasses? Here they are. Julius was one of the brothers that they got over to this country just in time to participate in the Civil War, and they did so with this distinguished, I should say that. And the reason I bring him up is I want to show you. I've showed you the first on our list, the baptisms. Now I wanted to show you a marriage document. And it has to do with Julius. And there's his registration of marriage, all right? Now, unless for our purposes here today, it's not when it took place, but rather who the witnesses were, all right? We've got 2 witnesses here. Henry Veers, Vehrs, and Mrs. So-and-so Benjamin. Who is Mrs. Benjamin? Well, it doesn't require much. I look down here, and he was the person who performed the wedding. Usually the wife of the pastor is in the room, and she signed it. Right? But the other one, Veers. Who was Veers? Well, we develop it a little bit, and lo and behold, Veers had married Sophie, the sister, 4 months before. He was also in the military at the same time as Julius was. They were not in the identical unit, but they were in adjacent units. We go in at called the Iron Brigade. That may ring a bell with a lot of you genealogists. So, an important witness, you bet. Henry Veers was he was a brother-in-law. Here's a picture of him with Sophie. All right? That's the sister. And the gal he married in the Bergman family. We've got a land conveyance. I'll use Edward for that. Here's Edward. Edward's a story unto himself. He was an independent cuss. He left the house when he was about 16, went up and worked in the mines in northern Michigan, Houghton, Michigan. Met a girl up there, married her, and stayed in Michigan the balance of his life. The best we can figure, this was the wedding of this daughter, that they all got together for this family photo. It's the only possible explanation for that family photo at that time. Yeah. Oh, wait. Yeah, they all had. And there is the land conveyance. The Michigan land conveyance. You notice that the wife has signed as well. Alvina, down here. And here's a fellow by the name of Nelson Adair, and then W.L. Roberts. Well, W.L. Roberts was the notary. So usually one of the witnesses you're going to find was part of the hierarchy of preparing the documents. But Adair, he was a farmer in Stanwood, and he, like my great uncle, had homesteaded there in 1877, so they knew each other. This Adair was a very important guy, and I'm pleased that Edward knew him. He was two-term Mecosta County supervisor, a Republican, and a Methodist. So that gives you an idea what you're going to find on a land conveyance. If you didn't know that his wife's name was Alvina before, or how she spelled it, because it's susceptible of many spellings. Why, here it is. This is the way she wrote it, and that's the one I prefer to go by. Here's a chattel conveyance. We have to meet Otto for that. I think Otto dodged the draft, but I can't prove it. He wound up way over on the Missouri River. And he married a gal. This is his second marriage, but those kids in the top are still from his first marriage. And here's the Missouri document that nailed it for me, as well as a copy of the marriage. But this led me to it by looking through land records. Notice this is, he's conveying or having conveyed to him some oats and rye and some cows and I don't know what all right? And down below are some witnesses. Beauchamp, or as we say in this country from the British, Beecham, and Robb. Beecham was a well-off farmer born in Virginia. He was age 60. I look at the genealogy of these people too. Robb was also a farmer. He was born in Germany. He was 41 at the time and had served in the 4th Missouri Cavalry during the war with the Union. Moved to Washington County, Idaho in the next few years after this conveyance. The interaction with Otto I have not yet established, but it's one of those things that I want to do. You've met half of them now. Haven't met Henry. He was the eldest. And he was the one that stayed behind to get his education. When he came to this country, he did mostly had mostly educated jobs, that sort of thing. And I have here his pension application. One item from his pension application. Now, those of you who have them on the shelf back home, after you see this, you're going to run back and pull them out tonight, and you won't get any sleep. You're going to be going right through them. I said to myself, who is this? This is a proof by somebody years later. Notice the number of years that 45 years later, when this application was made, this little girl, this person, Mrs. Arndt, August Arndt, is making an affidavit that she was at the wedding 45 years later. And I thought to myself, well, that's interesting. I'm going to have to look, who was she? Well, it turns out, by doing a little digging, I found out that her name was Wucherpfennig, Wucherpfennig. N-I-G, and that was one of the two witnesses on Henry's marriage certificate, who was in fact her father. And so her father was in attendance, and this little girl was age 3 when she was at that wedding. And she remembers it and can attest to the fact that she was there. I've got to find something in the newspapers. I dare say she was the flower girl, wouldn't you, at age 3? And that's why she remembered it. She was dressed up, and it made a tremendous impression on this little girl. Okay, that's stuff you can get off of a pension application. She was a witness. Now, you met Edward and his family over there in Michigan. When he died, they had this is from his estate papers. All of the kids had to sign this particular affidavit. It's floating away on. And Albert E. Millet is appointed the administrator. Who was he? Well, I had to nose around and find out that. I had to find out. I have to know who these people are. And there he was. Who was he? He's the undertaker. He had to get his money. And so he saw to it that he was appointed the administrator to get his bucks. All right? So now you got another witness there. And incidentally, the kids didn't get a dime. There wasn't anything left. The undertaker got it all.
Nothing's changed.
What?
He said nothing's changed.
Nothing's changed. Nothing
Yeah,
changed.
really. That's
Now
right.
it goes on.
Yes.
We've got plenty of time, right?
You want to see it? Huh?
Yeah.
I don't have a copy of. I wanted to bring the passenger list where Carl Stender, remember the guy from down in Venice, came over with his family later, and who traveled with them but Henry, our Henry. He finished his education, and they're all on the same document. Unfortunately, the document I have would not reproduce. It's so dark. I'm going to have to check another reel out from the government and take a better picture of it. I mentioned newspaper. No, this is oh no, I skipped the naturalization. This has a story behind it too. This is a naturalization. This is Henry's naturalization. And the story is, once you read the document, make a timeline with it, you say, my heavens, he's filing years after he filed his original, the first one. What took so long? Well, the story there is that he was serving on the city council, and the board chairman got sick and had to resign, and they were raising Henry to the board chairman, and they discovered that he had never been naturalized. So he had to hustle down to the courthouse years later and go through that final step. And who was the witness? The sick fella who he was replacing. He went with him. He wanted at Gottlieb Daimler. He was an influential man in the town of Two Rivers, board chairman since 1849. Ill health brought him to resignation in April 1876. And Henry was elected to succeed him. But they found out that they were close friends and civic associates. Another dimension to my great uncle Henry. I mentioned the passenger list and who was on it. Now a newspaper report. This is more about Henry. This is from a German newspaper and published in this country, and I got the translation below it, and it reads, I'll have
to read it here. I thought I had it in text. Postmaster General Vila circulated as a surprise for the good citizens of Two Rivers by naming Urbain Requet to the job of postmaster. Mr. Requet is a good Democrat, capable and honest, and the citizenry is generally pleased with his appointment, although no one awaited it. Mr. Henry Weeman and Felix Walsh applied for the office, and we believe that Mr. Weeman would have received an overwhelming majority if put to a vote. Thus, the bits of news and methods of Joseph Rankin, he was the senator who made the appointment, and Postmaster General Vilas are sometimes amazing. So it wasn't the candidate desired by the people, but by Joseph Rankin. The people of Two Rivers can be thankful that a good choice was made, even though it wasn't the choice of the people. So Henry was the choice of the people, but he got snookered. It didn't surprise me that he moved away within the next year. Right? Okay, we learned a lot about him. Sometimes the subject himself is the witness. I don't have any overheads for this, but there are plenty in my records. Baptismal entries, you go page by page and find. During the 30 Years' War, it's awful difficult. The records shut down, or they're spotty in Germany during that horrible 30 Years' War. But sometimes by going on the edges, or just after the war is over and looking through, you can see one of them I have here that was especially valuable. It says, Anna Freiss, wife of leather maker Friedrich Freiss of Castellon. She was a witness at a baptism. And notice I now have a relationship between Anna and Friedrich. Because in that baptismal entry, it says, Anna, wife of leathermaker Friedrich Freiss of Castellon. So it helps identify, especially when there are gaps, like that lousy war that went on for some 30 years. Census, I told you about being in the same town, same place. Oh, yeah, here you get to meet. Now, I told you, Dora married a Norwegian, and he ran steamboats out of the city of Green Bay. And I told you about Caroline, the gal with the shifting birth date. There's Caroline standing. There she is, haughty Caroline. And Doris is seated below. The sisters, they're together. This was about 1900, taken over Dunn County. And the hats alone are worth the price of admission. Here's one of those cases where a census shows one of my folks marrying the guy next door. You'll see here's Dora, the gal you just saw seated here. Dora Hansen, Gundy, his name was Gundy, well, never mind. And next door to them are the Harts. And their daughter, Dora's daughter, married one of the Hart boys. Married the guy next door. So, in this instance, you only needed that one page. But remember my admonition. Take the page before it, the page after it, if not more. You've got one other guy here that I haven't mentioned, and that's Frederick, poor old Frederick. He never got married, went over, homesteaded 80 acres in Dunn County, and at the age of 27 blew his brains out. We don't know why. There's a squib in the newspaper about it, but it doesn't give the reason, just reporting the occasion. But family memory is that it was an affair of the heart, that he had been spurned by his own true love, for whom he had been preparing this 80 acres, and the world no longer seemed of any interest to him, and he departed. So much for Frederick. I don't even have a picture of the poor fellow, but I wish I did. You haven't seen Wilhelmina yet either. Now there's Wilhelmina. This is in her home, about 1900 in the city of Manitowoc. She married a Danish fellow, highly educated Danish fellow that came over, and they had a beautiful home up there in Manitowoc. He lost an arm, got blood poisoning at one point, and had to have a good portion of his arm removed back in the 1870s. And the reason she's so near and dear to me is that she is my great-grandmother. And as a final act of witnessing, we will show another picture of her. There she is in 1920 with her daughter, her granddaughter, and her great-grandson, who 86 years later is telling you to call your next witness.
Thank you, Harold.
That's right. We're about 3 or 4 weeks away from Harold Bergman's 87th birthday.
Yeah.
And, really going
Thank you, Harold.